Hello friends, welcome to these video lectures by JK Shah classes. I am Professor Saurabh Bhatt. I am a chartered accountant apart from being a company secretary, and I have also done my law. Now friends, as you are aware, these lectures are on paper 7, that is direct tax and international tax, which is a 100-mark paper. It is in group 2 of your CA final. Now friends, the year 2020 has been a year of great lesson for us. I always believe that any adversity teaches us a lot. Till 2019, our belief system was that there is a particular problem, we should have dynamic solutions to a problem. But the year 2020 has taught us that sometimes the problem itself may change its color. So in year 2020, we have realized that in order to adapt to these changes, one of the important role, or I would say the most important role, is played by technology. Friends, although these lectures are being conducted online, but I assure you that we have had a comprehensive coverage of all topics that are relevant for CA final, all case laws that are relevant for CA final, all circulars and notifications that have been issued by CBDT, that is Central Board of Direct Taxes. Apart from that, one of the apprehension that students have as far as video lectures are concerned has also been addressed in these video lectures. Sir, what is that? In classroom lectures, you have the benefit of immediately asking doubts to a professor. I can assure you friends, based on my experience of teaching, that in every provision, somewhere we have now understood what kind of basic doubts a student can ask. That doubt may range from being a most stupid doubt to a very intelligent doubt. All kinds of issues have been addressed in these video lectures. So I assure you that you will have an experience as if the professor is in front of you, I am in front of you, and I will address all the doubts that arise in your mind. Not just that, as I stated earlier, we have covered not just the questions that have been asked in past institute exams, but also all questions from revision test papers and mock test papers. As and when for your attempt, that is May 2021 or November 2021, the institute releases a revision test paper or mock test paper, we will be having a separate lecture which will be provided to you, and that lecture will address any recent amendment circular notification, if any, which has been incorporated by ICAI. With that friends, I wish to address 3 basic points as far as this introduction lecture is concerned. First point is with regard to your paper pattern. Now please note friends, as I told you that this is a 100 marks paper. If I have to write down, you may please first understand what I am saying. After understanding, you may pause the video and just scribble down the paper pattern as I am writing over here. So as far as the paper pattern of paper 7 is concerned, the paper is of 100 marks. I can divide these 100 marks into 4 parts. Part A comprises of your heads of income. When I say heads of income, which chapters am I talking about? I am talking about the chapters of capital gain, business income, which is also called as PGBP, income from other sources. Sir, you missed 2 heads, salary and house property. Now please understand friends, if I have to talk in terms of weightage of marks, salary and house property is very rarely asked in exams. Not that we will not be covering it, we will definitely cover those 2 chapters as well. But if I am talking in terms of weightage, then these 3 chapters from heads of income are the most important. Apart from heads of income, in part A, I will also be covering the provisions of section 14A the provisions relating to assessment of firm, the provisions relating to assessment of AOP, and the provision relating to assessment of company, which is nothing but minimum alternate tax. Now here friends, if I talk in terms of weightage, then these chapters which are comprised in part A are asked normally for almost 25 marks. Those questions may be in the form of short notes, may be practical questions, or even now they may be MCQs. So we'll be addressing all those kinds of questions. Part B is international taxation. In international taxation, the institute has prescribed 30 marks reserved for these chapters. There are 8 chapters in international taxation which we will be covering in part B of our syllabus. But sure short 30 marks will be asked. As you are aware friends, that there is a separate elective paper on international tax as well. When we do international tax, I'll be giving you a brief preview or like a trailer of what may be asked in that elective paper as well, so that for those people who are fence sitters, who have not yet decided which elective paper has to be opted, they may make an informed decision. That is part B. Part C consists of assessment provisions. In this, there are 6 chapters. This starts from your income tax authorities, how you are required to furnish a return of income. After you furnish a return, how processing of the return takes place. After processing the return, the tax department may send you a love letter, that is your scrutiny assessment notice. After that, how scrutiny is completed, that is called as regular assessment. Sometimes after a regular assessment, there may be a reassessment. And in case you are not happy with the assessment, you may go in appeals or revision. All those provisions will be covered over in part C. Also note friends, sometimes there may be a search in your house which is called as, in common language we call as raid. So how those raid provisions are incorporated in income tax also we are going to learn in part C. Part D consists of your miscellaneous chapters. Sir, which are these miscellaneous chapters? They are in the form of business trust, alternate investment fund, provisions of TDS and TCS. In fact, TDS and TCS, sure short one question is asked if you see last 5 years. Then provisions of penalty chapter, prosecution. Then you may have income tax settlement chapter. And as I told you friends, salary and house property will be covered over here in part D, because in terms of weightage, although it is a head of income, but that comes in miscellaneous chapters for final CA. These put together are asked for almost 20 marks. Sir, you did not tell us part C will be asked for how many marks? Because I wish to tell you something about assessment. When I was doing final CA, at that point in time, assessment chapter, that is part C, had a lot of weightage. In fact, we used to say that in accounts paper, that is FR, you do consolidation and amalgamation, you will pass the exam. And in direct taxes, you do assessment provisions and provisions of Wealth Tax Act, then you will pass the exam. If I talk of the current scenario, Wealth Tax Act is no longer in the statute books. With effect from 31st March 2015, that has been discontinued. So we don't have wealth tax. And as far as assessment, which used to be asked almost for 40-45 marks, now the weightage is only to the extent of 20 to 25 marks. Still, 20-25 marks are very important for us. Sometimes even 1 mark can make a difference, as many of you all may have already experienced. So we are going to learn in depth even regarding assessment provisions. Friends, also please note that the entire video lectures that you are about to start, the mode of instruction is only in English. For those of y'all who may be wondering that why entire English, those who may be having a preference towards Hindi, my request to you is that 3 papers, that is corporate law, direct taxes and indirect taxes, these pertain to a law. As far as a law is concerned, every word has got a weightage. When we in fact do assessment provisions chapter, I will be teaching you all that what is the difference between the word shall and may. Big difference. What is the difference between the words opinion and belief? What is the difference between the word objection and aggrieved? So at such point in time, if you learn in the language in which you are going to write the paper, it will be for the benefit of all of you. As far as this introduction lecture is concerned, friends, I wanted to highlight 3 points, out of which first one I have highlighted, that is your paper pattern. The second point which I want to cover in this introduction lecture is regarding what is a budget. Now you may have heard from your, if you go to articleship, then from your principals, or in your house you may have heard from your parents that somewhere in February they sit in front of TV and they watch for 1.5 to 2 hours the speech of finance minister. Please note, friends, that as far as Income Tax Act is concerned, every year there are certain amendments. The unique part about direct and indirect tax paper is that every year there are at least some changes in the law. That may be by way of introduction of new provisions, that may be by way of omission of certain provisions. Sometimes an entire chapter is changed. Like for example, this year, friends, you all are appearing in May 2021, November 2021. Dividend taxation has undergone a sea change. We are going to learn about it. That will be covered in income from other sources. But the point I am trying to make is that these changes are introduced by the finance minister on first day of February. That's a custom. Earlier it used to be last day of February, last working day of February. This year, or rather 2014 onwards, they have made it first day of February. So on first day of February at 11 in the morning, in Lok Sabha, that is lower house of parliament, the finance minister introduces something called as a finance bill. All changes that have to be incorporated in Income Tax Act are introduced via this finance bill. In common language, we call finance bill as a budget, because this finance bill provides for what the government expects is going to be their expenditure in the next year, and what it expects is going to be their revenue in the next year. So you, in financial management paper, you must have learned something called as budgetary control. So in budgetary control, what do? We anticipate what is going to be our next year's expenses and our next year's revenue. And if there is a variance, then we do, in costing we have learnt variances. But the point I am trying to make over here is, in the same manner as every organization, as every entity, as every household, even in your house, your parents must be charting down a budget of what is going to be the expenses and income in the next month, how much they want to save, how much they want to invest, how much they want to spend, whether they want to plan a foreign trip. Similarly, the government, friends, plans for the next year's income and expenses. For us, that is taxpayers, I don't know how many of y'all are taxpayers. Articleship stipend, I doubt exceeds 2,50,000 rupees. If it does, good for you. But the point is that for us taxpayers, income tax is an expense. For government, it is a income. The government uses that revenue to spend on various infrastructure and welfare projects. That is their expenses. So through this finance bill, through this budget, they introduce what are going to be the provisions for taxation and what are going to be the provisions for various expenses that they want to incur. In the next chapter, that is rates of tax, I have dealt in depth as to how the budget is presented, how it is passed in Lok Sabha, then what happens in Rajya Sabha, and then how finally the bill becomes an act. But suffice to note right now that all our changes that we are going to study May 2021 and November 2021 have already become an act, that is Finance Act 2020. So all amendments that we are going to learn are amendments made up till Finance Act 2020. But as far as after Finance Act being passed, the government may still declare any circulars via CBDT, through CBDT, that is Central Board of Direct Taxes, or they may issue certain notifications, or there may be judicial ruling or judicial pronouncement, which we call as case laws. So as far as our year is concerned, friends, all such circulars, notifications, case laws, which are made, which are prescribed up till 31st of October 2020 will be covered as part of this lecture. So please note, friends, that May 2021, November 2021, the relevant Finance Act is Finance Act 2020, which has already been passed. The relevant case laws, notifications, circulars, which are pronounced up till 31st October 2020 are relevant for May 2021, that is 6 months prior to your exam. And naturally for November 2021, the circular, notification, case law up till 30th April 2021 are relevant. As far as these relevant case laws, circulars and notifications are concerned, we will be having a separate lectures, and thoroughly all those case laws, circular, notification will be covered. The third point which I wish to discuss as far as this introduction lecture is concerned is with regard to what is a case law. Many people have one common grievance which they ask as students, that sir, do we have to remember the name of case law? Do we have to remember the citation? So you may note that after the name of case law, certain figures are given, 322 ITR page 1, 322 ITR 479, and in bracket High Court is given or Supreme Court is given. So do we have to remember it? First and foremost, friends, please understand what is a case law. Under Code of Civil Procedure, we have a principle of law called as res judicata. What do you mean by res judicata? Res judicata means that same issue should not be agitated over and over again. Our courts are extremely busy. There are a lot of pending matters. So when they give a verdict on a particular issue with regard to two parties, the court says again in future, if same issue arises for other parties, then they should look at the ruling which we have given. They should not again come back to us, so that the court's burden reduces. That's the reason why whenever court gives a pronouncement, they are printed in a book. Those are known as case laws. And how are they reported? I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm talking about a case that is CIT versus CIT is Commissioner of Income Tax. We'll be learning about that as well. Hindustan Organics Limited, 366 ITR page 1, Bombay High Court. This was a nice ruling on the issue of section 43B. We'll be covering that later. But the point here is, please note friends, the party which is mentioned prior to the versus, here who is the mentioned prior to versus? CIT. That party is known as the appellant. This person has a problem That is why he has gone to court. The party mentioned after verses is called as the respondent. This person never wanted to agitate, but he has been dragged to the court of law by the appellant. After that, in the bracket, what is mentioned is known as the citation. So if you go to an advocate's office or a chartered accountant's office who is in litigation, he may tell his assistant, please get 366 ITR page 1. So he knows that by citing that particular volume, he will refer to this particular decision. So for ease of reference, these digest, ITR is a digest. There are various digests. ITR is the oldest one, which is called as income tax reporter. Like that, you have DTR, direct tax reporter, SOT, select order of tribunal, ITD, income tax tribunal decision. Like that, several taxmen. These days, in fact, we have lot of portals online like CCH, taxman.com, taxsutra.com. Many big four people may be using that. TaxSutra has a tie-up with almost all big fours. So the point I am trying to make is that this in between ITR, which is mentioned, that is the name of the digest. Now case laws are reported almost every day. That's why these digests are available in several volumes. So the volume number as far as this particular case law which I have written as an example is 366. And the page number of the volume in which you will get that particular decision is written after the ITR. So that is page number 1 in this case. After that, in bracket, what is written is the court which has reported the decision or the court which has pronounced the verdict. Over here, it is Bombay High Court. It may be High Court, it may be Tribunal, it may be Supreme Court, various appellate forums. So please note friends, CIT here is appellant. I say it at the cost of repetition. After verses is the respondent. Then 366 is the volume number of digest. Which digest over here? It is ITR. And 1 is the page number. And then in bracket is the court which has delivered the verdict. A question is arising in your mind. So do we need to remember this entire thing? Of course not. Please understand friends, I will put it in a reverse order. If you don't remember the name of case law, that is fine. If you remember the principle propounded in that case law, that is sufficient. But a higher level than that would be if you remember the name of the assessee. So over here, even if you write in exam, in Hindustan Organics case, it was held as so and so. Or in Hindustan Organics case, Bombay High Court held so and so. Even that is fine. And the most ideal thing would be that if you write the full case law, CIT versus Hindustan Organics in bracket Bombay High Court. But you don't need to remember the citation. Even advocates and chartered accountants don't remember the citation. So this citation, even though given in your module or study material or study mat or SM, whatever you may call it, the citation need not be remembered at all. You don't need to take that effort. But if you plan your studies right from today and ensure that every day at least certain case laws you jot down at the back of your notebook and try and go through it one by one. It will take hardly 10 to 15 minutes every day. I assure you that after a certain time, you will remember the case even though you do not take special effort to remember it. I'll give you an example. Many of you all may be reading Hanuman Chalisa or may be reading Ganpati Atharva Shirsh or you may be reading some holy book which you chant in the morning. When you're reading, do you try and recollect it? Do you try and remember it? Do you try and memorize it? We don't. But the point is that after a certain number of days, when we keep continuously referring that particular holy book, it may so happen that you automatically memorize whatever shlokas are given in that particular holy book. Similarly, this is our holy book, income tax. We have to take it very seriously. So some people come to me in the month of March and ask me, sir, I want to now remember case laws. I tell them it can't happen overnight. It has to be planned now. So next video onwards, whichever case law I am discussing, friends, Why don't you take an effort to jot it down in your own handwriting? That also makes a difference. If you jot it down in your own handwriting, all case laws at one place, and at least every day or every alternate day, just spare 10 minutes for me. I assure you that at the end of my last lecture, you will be able to recollect every case law by name. That's my assurity to you. So, friends, in this lecture or in this introduction video, I have highlighted three very important points. One was regard to the paper pattern. Second was with regard to how budget is passed or what is a budget. As I said, and I say it at the cost of repetition, Finance Act 2020 is applicable to us, May 2021, November 2021 attempts. And what is a case law and how citation is given. I hope, friends, the next video onwards, you enjoy this entire series of lectures. And as I told you, at various points, I will address those queries which arise in your mind as you are watching the video. I wish you happy studying. Take care of yourself and take care of your family. Thank you very much. Hello, friends. Welcome to this lecture. Today, we start with another very important part of your direct tax final CA paper, and that is international tax. Please understand, friends, that as far as international tax is concerned, though 30 marks are reserved in paper 7 for international tax, apart from that, we also have a separate elective paper of international tax. And to a greater extent, whatever is done over here in paper 7, 30 marks, is to a greater extent common with paper 6C, that is your elective paper. So if you study these 30 marks, which we are about to start today, if you study this thoroughly, properly, conceptually, then not only it will benefit you in paper 7, but you may be able to make an informed decision with regard to your choice of elective paper. And to a greater extent, what we cover here would be common with that elective paper international tax if you so choose to opt that elective. As far as paper 7 is concerned, friends, we have 8 chapters in international tax. Those 8 chapters together, sure shot, will be asked for 30 marks in your exam. Now, as far as the introduction to this international taxation is concerned, I am going to discuss two concepts. But as I said, I wish to first list down which are these 8 chapters which will be comprised in this larger umbrella chapter of international tax. So first and foremost, friends, the chapter that we have to study is transfer pricing. In this chapter, friends, we will learn that when related parties, when associated enterprise, the word for related party in international tax is associated enterprises, transact, they may not be transacting at arm's length price. So their profits have to be adjusted in accordance with the principle of arm's length price. Why is that done? How is that done? We will learn it. But the point is, that is my first chapter. The second chapter that we will be studying is double taxation relief. So when double taxation arises, how relief is granted, we will learn about it. I am just telling you in one sentence what is it that we are going to learn in those chapters. Of course, lot of things have to be covered over there. So you will have clear-cut conceptual understanding. That is my promise. Third is the chapter of non-resident taxation. Here we will learn, friends, regarding how residential status has to be determined, that has undergone a drastic change after Finance Act 2020, because now residential conditions have been amended to a greater extent. We will learn regarding that in non-resident taxation. Then we have the chapter of authority for advance ruling. So this is a forum which will help every assessee in preventing or avoiding unwanted litigations. How that is relevant in international tax, that we will learn in chapter 4. After that, friends, in chapter 5 we will learn equalization levy. Again, this year massive changes have been made to this chapter, so we will learn regarding that in this chapter number 5. Post that, friends, we have the chapter of application and interpretation of tax treaty. Application and interpretation of what? Tax treaty. Then, friends, the 7th chapter would be Model Tax Convention. How double taxation avoidance agreements are drafted, what is contained in double taxation avoidance agreement, what kind of articles are there in double taxation avoidance agreement. All of that we will learn in chapter 7, that is Model Tax Convention. But the scope of Model Tax Convention chapter in paper 7, that is your direct tax paper, is pretty small, and that scope exponentially expands in paper 6C, that is international tax. So same chapter, but the depth in international tax would be much greater. And the last one is base erosion and profit shifting, which is also famously called as BEPS, base erosion and profit shifting. Apart from that, friends, in non-resident taxation there is a concept called as eligible fund manager. Now that eligible fund manager has certain aspects that we have to be careful about. So I have taken that eligible fund manager as a separate 9th chapter. But that's, I mean, in our scheme of events, that's not relevant right now. What is relevant is that we have these majorly 8 and the last 9th chapter eligible fund manager, which we have to understand so that we cover our portion of international taxation. So naturally I'll start with the first chapter in the next video. But before I end this video, I want to tell you 2 things which you need to be aware about in international tax. First and foremost, why do I require, or why does in the first place double taxation itself arise? So I have understood now these 8 chapters have to be studied by me, or 8 plus 1 9, to understand or cover my portion of international tax. That's fine. But I am going on to something very basic, because many of you all may not be well versed with international tax. So let me discuss as if you know nothing. So my basic question is that why we require this international tax as a separate chapter? We already are studying domestic taxation. Then why is it that international tax becomes so special? Here, friends, please understand that first reason why international taxation is relevant is because of a concept called as double taxation. Please understand this, friends. The theory of that is given in my book, but I want to explain this. That because double taxation arises, we require a set pattern, a set code of conduct when cross-border transactions take place, so that we avoid double taxation. But why does this double taxation arise, sir? Because please understand, friends, across the world, there are 2 methods or 2 systems of taxation which is followed. The first is called as a residence based rule of taxation. First is called as residence based rule of taxation, and the second is called as source based rule of taxation. Second is called as source based rule of taxation. What do you mean by residence based rule? Let us say for India, India follows residence based rule. For its residents. For its residents. Please understand this, friends. So what India says, or government of India say, that Mr. Assessee, you are staying in my country, you are my resident. Now I don't care where you are earning your income. You may earn income in India or outside India, in Sri Lanka, in Africa, in USA. But because you are my resident, I am going to tax your global income. As against that, friends, there is another system of taxation followed across the world, which is called as source based rule. In source based rule, the country tells its taxpayer that Mr. Taxpayer, I do not care whether you are resident in my country or resident somewhere else. All I care about is that you have earned income in my country. And because you have earned income in my country, you are going to pay tax in my country. So let's say, for example, Singapore follows source based rule. Now, friends, what will happen? Suppose I give you an example. Suppose my video lectures, as you are watching it, it became viral across the world. Lot of people from outside India started watching my video. And as a guest lecturer, finally, I was called to some university in Singapore. Now, when I go and deliver lecture in Singapore, can I say my source of income is in Singapore? I have earned my income in Singapore because I have delivered lecture in Singapore. But at the same time, I am resident of what? New India. Sorry, India. India is, I think, in constitution still the same. It is just some political parties who call it New India. So I am a resident of India. So can I say India will tell me that Mr. Assessee, you earned income in Singapore, very good. But because you are my resident, you have to pay tax in my country. At the same time, Singapore already told me that since you have delivered lecture in Singapore, you pay tax in our country because source of income is in that country. So can I make a statement, friends? My income which suffered tax in Singapore also suffers tax in India. That gives rise to double taxation. So the primary reason why I require a double taxation avoidance agreement, or why I require a scheme of international tax, a scheme of cross-border tax, is to make sure that double taxation is prevented. Now, some of you all may be extra smart. You all may say, sir, but why does the government care? Let's say Indian government here, in your case, got 30% tax. Suppose Singapore government's tax rate is also 30%. So Singapore government also got tax 30%. You are left with balance 40. I earned 100. I'm not telling you my actual fees. I earned 100%. 30% went to Indian government. 30% went to Singapore government. I am left with 40. So So why does the government care? They to got their 30%. Please understand, friends, if governments keep such attitude that I will also recover tax, let them also recover tax, let the taxpayer suffer, then you know what will start happening? I will tell myself, I will say that Mr. Saurabh Bhatt, when you delivered lecture in Singapore, you ended up paying 60% tax. But when you deliver lecture in India itself, your residence also here, sources also here, so only 30% tax. So don't do any global trade, don't do any global exchange. Because if you earn income outside India, then you are suffering by paying higher taxes in India or globally. So can I make a statement, friends, that if double taxation is allowed to be thrived, is allowed to flower, is allowed to blossom, then international trade will suffer. So my first point is, friends, that it is very essential to prevent double taxation, to avoid double taxation, for promoting international trade. That's the reason we require international tax, or we require a study of international tax to understand how this double taxation can be prevented. So first reason is that. Apart from that, friends, apart from the fact that I will be studying international tax chapter 1 to chapter 8 because I have to prevent double taxation, there is another reason why I require international taxation or a study of international tax. And that is, friends, apart from preventing double taxation, international tax helps me in preventing double non-taxation. Prevents double non-taxation. See, you should not be taxed on the same income twice merely because you have earned income outside your country of residence. But at the same time, somewhere you should pay tax. It should not so happen that you are paying tax in none of the countries. How that situation can arise, friends? Let us say, I'll give you an example how double non-taxation can arise. My objective is to what? Prevent double non-taxation also. That's why I'm going to study international tax. But how double non-taxation arises? Suppose, friends, your company, let's say ABC Limited India, and XYZ Limited Singapore are both related to each other. You are both sister concerns. Now both of you all have a profit of 100 crores. Profit before tax is how much? 100 crores. Now you want to prevent, you want to avoid paying tax in both the countries as a group. How will you do that? You find out that in India, the tax rate is 30%. Generally speaking. And tax rate, let's say in Singapore, is 0%. What will you do? You will say, okay, instead of me having a profit before tax of 100 crore and Singapore company also having tax of profit before tax of 100 crores, let me shift my profits. Let me shift my profits. How do I shift my profits? I can maybe pay royalty to the other party. I can pay some management fee to the other party. I can pay some technical fee to the other party. How will the officer come to know that there is any service rendered or not? So what I will do is, I will shift my profits from India to Singapore. So that position becomes like this. That in India, your profit is before tax 0. In Singapore, your profit before tax is 200. So that in both jurisdictions, you pay 0 tax. Rather than what in India you would have paid, that is 30 lakhs or 30 crores. So can I make a statement, friends, that such activity, now listen to this very carefully, such activity of shifting profits, such activity of shifting profits from a high tax jurisdiction to a low tax jurisdiction is called as eroding the taxable base. Is called as eroding the taxable base. Because my taxable base of income, which was 100 crores over here, has become how much? It has become 0 crores. So that is erosion of taxable income. How am I doing that? By shifting my profits from where to where? Low tax jurisdiction to high tax, or high tax jurisdiction to low tax. So can you see over here, friends, the higher the tax rate, the lower the profits. So moment in India, the tax rate was 30%, the profit reduced to 0. But here when the tax rate is 0, that is, it is already low, my profit increases from 100 to 200. Why am I doing that? So that there is double non-taxation. So point to be understood here, friends, is I require international tax or study of international tax on account of two reasons. First reason is double taxation is bad. Person should not be doubly taxed on the same income merely because of conflict of residence rule and source rule followed by different countries. So that double taxation, if it arises, to prevent that, naturally I require international tax. But along with that, even if the assessee is trying to act smart, he is trying to erode his taxable base by shifting his profits from a high tax jurisdiction to low tax jurisdiction. Then to prevent such kind of a habit which creates double non-taxation, for that also I require, for prevention of that as well, I require international tax. So from the next video onwards, friends, we are going to start with this first chapter, that is transfer pricing. But the point that you have to remember in all these chapters of international tax is, what is the idea of international tax? Why international tax is required? Because in cross-border taxation or cross-border transactions, there can be double taxation, or you can arrange your affairs to achieve double non-taxation. To prevent both eventualities, I require international tax. I will see you in the next video with the first chapter in international taxation, that is transfer pricing. Till then, friends, take care of yourself. Bye-bye. Hello, friends. In my last lecture, we have seen the rates of tax as far as individuals are concerned. I discussed the provision of existing scheme and the provision of new scheme, that is section 115 BAC. In this lecture, friends, we are going to look at certain questions where we compute the tax liability under the existing scheme and the old scheme. But before I proceed on to that, I want to give you two clarifications with regard to the existing scheme. And that is, first and foremost, one thing you should not forget. Whenever in Income Tax Act, and at various places this will happen, whenever in Income Tax Act, I ask you that what is the definition of a senior citizen or super senior citizen, your response should be that, sir, senior citizen means a person who has attained the age of 60 but not 80 at any time during the year and who is a resident in India. Super senior citizen means a person who has attained the age of 80 at any time during the year and who is a resident in India. So if you are a non-resident, friends, then you are never a senior citizen or a super senior citizen. If the question under existing scheme states that assessee is a 82-year-old who is a non-resident, then friends, the normal tax rate will apply over here. That is, basic exemption limit shall be 2,50,000. That's the reason why, friends, when I told you first point covers individual, I did not write individual who has not attained the age of 60. I wrote individual other than the ones who are covered in point number 2 and 3. And who are covered in point number 2 and 3? Senior or super senior citizen, but they must be resident in India. So I hope you understand. If the assessee is a non-resident individual, then the tax rate for point number 1 will apply to him under existing scheme, even if irrespective of his age. Naturally, under the new scheme of 115 BAC, there is no categorization of senior citizen and super senior citizen. So this discussion is not relevant for the new scheme. The second point which I wish to clarify is with respect to a circular given by Central Board of Direct Taxes. Now this circular, friends, please mark my words, is very interesting, and I'll tell you why. Again, since this circular pertains to the age determination of senior and super senior or very senior citizens, this is relevant only under the existing scheme. Now, let me put it in a question format. If I ask you that a person was born on 1/4/1961, when does he attain the age of 60 years? Can I make a statement, friends? He will attain the age of 60 on 1st April 2021. So, if I ask you for financial year 21-22, for financial year 21-22, is this person a senior citizen? Absolutely yes. Because he has attained the age of 60 on 1st April 2021. But the moot question is that as far as financial year 2021 is concerned, as far as financial year 2021 is concerned, will this person be regarded as senior citizen or not? Please understand my question again. My date of birth is 149, not my actual date of birth, but assuming my date of birth is 1/4/1961, then on 1st April 2021 I have attained the age of 60. So for financial year 2021-22, am I a senior citizen? Yes, of course. On first day of the year itself was my 60th birthday. But what about financial year 2021? So here your CBDT has clarified based on a Supreme Court ruling that generally, I mean, they give very nice logic. They say, or if I may rephrase it, when do you wish birthday to your best friend? You know, all of us have one best friend or maybe more than one. So that friend, when do you wish happy birthday to you? You wish at midnight. Why do you wish at midnight? Because at midnight itself, that person or his birthday has started. So what CBDT clarifies is that when your birthday is on 1st April, so on 31st March 2021, midnight itself, you have attained the age of 60. So even for the purpose of financial year 2021, you will be considered as a senior citizen. Please understand this. When are you considered senior citizen? When you have attained the age of 60 but not 80 at any time during the year. So CBDT says even if it is on 31st March midnight, still you will be considered as senior citizen for the purpose of Income Tax Act. That is what the circular states. It is clarification regarding attaining prescribed age of 60 or 80 years on 31st March itself in case of senior citizen or very senior citizen whose date of birth falls on 1st April for the purpose of Income Tax Act. And they have stated over here that in cases of persons whose date of birth falls on 1st April of calendar year, in other words, the broader question under consideration is whether person born on 1st April of particular year can be said to have completed a particular age on 31st March on the preceding day of his or her birthday or on the 1st April itself of that year. Then they have given certain Supreme Court decision, that's fine. I'll just read the observation. Supreme Court observed that while counting the age of person, whole of the day should be reckoned and it starts from 12 o'clock in the midnight, and he attains the specified age on the preceding day, the day preceding the anniversary of his birthday. In view of the aforesaid judgment, CBDT in exercise of powers under section 119, will be coming to section 119 later, hereby clarifies that a person born on 1st April would be considered to have attained a particular age on 31st March, the day preceding the anniversary of his birthday. In particular, the question of attainment of age of eligibility for being considered senior or very senior citizen would therefore be decided on the basis of above criteria. So I hope you understand, friends, that this circular would be relevant only when you're born on 1st April. Only then it makes sense, because that makes the difference of a year. Second, this is only relevant for the existing scheme, not new scheme, because under new scheme there is no categorization of senior and very senior citizen. But under existing scheme, if you are born on 1st April, then it is deemed that you complete the age of attaining 60 on the 31st March midnight itself. So even in the preceding year, you will be considered as a senior citizen. I hope that point is clear. After clarifying those 2 points, friends, let me move over to the questions. As I told you, we'll be looking at certain questions. We know now know the scheme of old and new, that is existing and new. I'll be looking at certain questions on that. But before that, friends, let me also clarify as to what are the rates of surcharge, because when we do the questions, there will be certain questions when surcharge also has to be added. So here please understand, first of all, friends, that surcharge is something that is added to the tax amount. So tax is calculated on your income, surcharge is calculated on the amount of tax. And how much is the surcharge? In case your income, total income, exceeds 50 lakh rupees but it does not exceed 1 crore total income, then the rate of surcharge is 10%. If your total income exceeds 1 crore but does not exceed 2 crore, then it is 15%. In case your total income exceeds 2 crore but does not exceed 5 crore, then last year Finance Number 2 Act 2019 exponentially increased the rate of surcharge. They made it 25%. And in case your income exceeds 5 crores, the rate of surcharge was made as 37%. But the government clarified here, friends, because there was a big backlash. People said that we are not going to pay this 25% and 37% surcharge. So, first in the lot who revolted against this were FIIs, that is foreign institutional investors. So, government clarified that when foreign institutional investors earn income from capital gain, their surcharge would be restricted only to 15% on such capital gain, irrespective of the fact that capital gain may be 5 crore or about 2 crore, doesn't matter. The maximum surcharge will be 15% on the amount of capital gain earned by FII. We will be doing some computation based questions on that in non-resident taxation chapter. But the point is that rate of surcharge would be restricted to 15% for FIIs on the income earned by way of capital gain. So many other people said, sir, what crime have we conducted? For their capital gain FII, you are restricting the surcharge rate to 15%. For us also you do it. So government said, fine, in case you earn capital gain under section 111A and 112A, that is short-term capital gain on listed share or long-term capital gain on listed shares, then again the rate of surcharge will be restricted to 15% on such amount of capital gain, irrespective of the fact that your total income exceeds 2 crores or 5 crores. This again, friends, I have discussed in greater depth in capital gains chapter, at which point in time certain questions are also covered. But let us right now only focus on the rate of surcharge. So if I ignore this capital gain point for the time being, I can say that the surcharge rates are given in the Finance Act. Maximum surcharge rate can be 37%. Minimum surcharge rate is 10% if your income exceeds 50 lakh rupees. I say this at the cost of repetition, that tax is calculated on the income, surcharge is added to the amount of tax, and on the total of tax plus surcharge you add 4% health and education cess. So after that, friends, one last point before again I move over to the question is rebate under section 87A. Most of you all are aware about this, that when your total income of individual who is resident in India Individual, not HUF. Individual who is resident in India, total income does not exceed 5 lakhs, then you will get a rebate under section 87A either of your entire tax payable or 12,500 rupees, whichever is lower. So lower of the two will be the eligible rebate under section 87A. So now friends, now comes the time when we look at certain questions. Let's try and solve it together. My request to you all is that first question, let me do it. You can just watch as I'm doing it. After that, you may pause the video. If you wish to copy, answers are already given. If you wish to copy some specific point, you may do that. But let us solve it so that we have a better understanding. I've already covered the existing scheme vis-a-vis new scheme. I've already covered surcharge rates. I've already covered what is rebate, and I told you that health and education cess to be added is 4%. So the question says calculate tax liability in the following cases. Case 1 says Mr. X, aged 53 years, a resident, has gross total income of 76 lakhs. He avails a deduction under chapter 6A of 2 lakhs. Now this is one point which you need to note. Many a times in the question they may indicate, and you have to decipher, you have to understand whether the assessee has gone for existing scheme or new scheme. So under the new scheme, one of the condition is that chapter 6A deduction cannot be availed. But here they have given that he does avail a deduction under chapter 6A. So can I make a statement, friends, that because he has availed chapter 6A deduction means he is not opting for the new scheme and he is going for the existing scheme. Let me reiterate this. Under new scheme, the individual does have a choice, either new scheme or existing scheme. But under new scheme, there is no option of availing various deductions. 41 points we saw. Out of that, one of the points was that you cannot avail deduction under chapter 6A. Here, has the assessee availed deduction? Yes. So that by implication is telling me that the assessee does not wish to go for new scheme and is opting for the existing scheme. When you go for the existing scheme, slab rate depends on what? Whether you are senior citizen, super senior citizen or otherwise. So can I make a statement his age is given in this question as 53? So he is neither super senior citizen nor senior citizen. So naturally the normal slab rate will apply. So now I am going to solve the question over here. How do I calculate the taxes? I will write down case 1, answer to question number 5. In that case 1, calculation of tax liability for Mr. X for AY 2021-22. Now, first and foremost, I will write down over here, since the question states that Mr. X wishes to avail deduction, let us say under section 80C, that is part of chapter 6A. He cannot avail beneficial tax rates prescribed under section 115 BAC. Therefore, the tax liability as per rates prescribed in Finance Act 2020 shall be as under. In the question, friends, they have told me that the gross total income is how much? I believe they have told me it is 76 lakhs. Less deduction under section 80C is 2 lakhs. So your total income, friends, amounts to 74 lakhs. On this, friends, the tax liability will be, can I say 0 to 2,50,000? The rate is 0, so tax is nil. 2,50,000 to 5 lakhs, it is 5%. If you calculate, that comes to 12,500. From 5 lakhs till 10 lakhs, the rate is 20%. So that comes to 1 lakh rupees. And above 10 lakhs, friends, now my total income is 74 lakhs. So up till 74 lakhs, it is 30%. So can I make a statement, friends? 10 lakhs till 74 lakhs. So that is 64 lakhs on that 30% amounts to 19 lakh 20,000. Now I need to aggregate this. So that will give me a total tax of 20 lakh 32,500. But now, friends, first and foremost, I need to check whether there will be a rebate under section 87A. Now, as per the rebate provision that we have just seen, that where your total income does not exceed 5 lakhs, only there you can avail rebate under 87A. That is, here your total income is 74 lakhs. How can you avail rebate? Definitely not. So, I will write here nil. So, 20 lakh 32,500 remains my liability, to which I will add surcharge. Now, friends, what should be the surcharge rate here? My total income is 74 lakhs. If you remember that where your income exceeds 50 lakhs but does not exceed 1 crore, the rate of surcharge is 10%. So I will add over here surcharge at the rate of 10%. So that is 203 250, and I will aggregate that, which gives me 22 lakhs 35,750 as tax plus surcharge. To this, friends, I will add health and education cess. Health and education cess at 4%. So that is 89,000, friends, 430. My request is, if you have a calci, please always reconfirm my calculation. So my total liability comes to 23 lakh 25,180. This is already rounded off till tens. Suppose this was 178, 22 lakh 23 lakh 25,178. Suppose, then I would round it off to 180. Nearest in tens, I would round it off. So that was the first case, friends. I hope you all understood. The most important part, friends, I would say, is to understand when you are availing 115 BAC and when you are not availing 115 BAC, because here the assessee is availing deduction under chapter 6A, so naturally he is not availing 115 BAC. Next is, friends, the next case that they have given me says Mr. X, age 74 years, a resident, has gross total income of 3 crores. He has opted for section 115 BAC. So now they have given me gross total income. Since he has opted 115 BAC, almost no deduction is eligible for him, and they have not stated anything in the question. So can I say that my total income itself is 3 crores, on which I'll adopt directly the rates given in 115 BAC. Since we are doing this for the first time, I am writing it over here how you will calculate the rates. In examination condition, friends, you need not again write down these slab rates. You need not provide the bifurcation. Even if you directly write down the tax liability and then finally add surcharge and cess, even that is fine. That does not make a difference. So let me write down over here, friends, case number 2. My request is please pay attention. As far as this case is concerned, if you have already copied this note, then you may directly move on to case 2. This note is very important. Case 2, my request is try and solve it on your own, because that will give us more and more confidence. So here I will say calculation of tax under section 115 BAC for Mr. Y. Now what were the tax rates, friends, under 115 BAC? So I will first write down total income, because gross total income, after that there are no deduction given. As such, when you opt for 115 BAC, you don't get much deductions. That's the whole idea. So here total income also is 3 crores. On this I will say tax liability. So can I say, friends, 0 to 2,50,000, the rate is nil, 0%, so it is nil. Then 2,50,000 till 5 lakhs, it is 5%, so it is 12,500, friends. 5 lakhs. So I hope you understand. It starts with 2,50,000. Then every addition of 2,50,000, rate increases by 5%. If you remember it like that, then it's not difficult to remember these rates. So 5 lakhs till 7,50,000, it is 10%. So can I say that comes to 25,000? 7,50,000, friends, till 10 lakhs, it is 15%. So that is 37,500. 10 lakhs to 12,50,000, it is 20%. So that is 50,000. 12,50,000 to 15 lakhs is 25%. So I believe that's 62,500. And 15 lakhs and above. So here I will say 15, above 15 lakhs till 3 crores. So till 3 crores, it is 30%. So can I say 2 crore 85 lakhs? On that, it is 30%. So that gives me 85 lakh 50,000. I will aggregate all this, friends. So that gives me an answer of 87 lakhs 37,500. Now once that happens, friends, then the rate of surcharge and all remains the same. That does not differ whether it is old or new scheme. So rate of surcharge when your income is above 2 crores but does not exceed 5 crore, it is 25%. So here, because my total income is 3 crores, I will say the surcharge also will be 25%. So surcharge at the rate of 25% is 21 lakh 84,375. If I aggregate this, it gives me 1 crore 9 lakh 21,875. To which, friends, I will add cess at the rate of 4%. So that 4% cess will be 4 lakh 36,875, and my total tax liability, friends, is 1 crore 13 lakhs 58,775. and 50. I hope you all understood, friends, how the tax was calculated over here. In this question, one of the more important points is to remember, be it old scheme or new scheme, the rate of surcharge remains the same based on your total income. In this very question, friends, which we are discussing right now, question number 5, there are two more parts to it. And in fact, one of those parts is pertaining to your marginal relief. I'm sure you have heard that term, that how do you calculate marginal relief. Lot of people come and later ask me regarding this marginal relief, so I've covered a question on that. But these case 3 and case 4 we will be looking at in our next lecture, where we continue with these calculation of tax rates for the individuals. I hope this lecture was clear to you all. You understood how we calculated the tax rate, tax liability rather, under existing scheme and new scheme in case 1 and case 2 respectively. Case 3 and case 4, as I said, we will discuss in the next lecture. Till then, take care of yourself. Thank you so much. Bye bye. Hello friends, welcome to this video lecture. Today we are starting with a new chapter, that is capital gains. In many respects, this chapter is a unique head of income. Why do I call it a unique head of income? Because unlike other heads of income, where you have a recurring income involved or a recurring receipt involved, capital gains, as the name itself suggests, involves a one-time receipt. So if I give you an example, how many months in a year do you earn salary? You earn every month. If you have a house property, you give it on rent. How many months in a year you earn rental income? You can say every month. If you have a fixed deposit in a bank account, you get periodic interest, which may be monthly, quarterly, or half yearly. Whereas, if I ask you that how many times in a year you sell an asset, it may be highly unusual. Many people sell their residential houses maybe once in a lifetime. So please understand, friends, the income occurring under capital gains is not a recurring receipt. It is a one-time receipt. Now also note, friends, that for any head of income, this applies for all. The most important part of the chapter is the charging section. So whenever you learn any head of income, if you know the charging section, then we say around 50 or 60% of the chapter is clear to you. So as far as capital gains is concerned, please note, friends, this is comprised in chapter 4D, chapter 4E rather, of your Income Tax Act. And in this chapter, the charging section is section 45. The chapter starts with section 45 and ends at section 55A. So all these sections, starting with 45, ending with 55A, we are going to learn in this chapter. As I said, charging section is given in 45 subsection 1. The charging section tells me that profits or gains arising from transfer of a capital asset shall, save as otherwise provided. What do you mean by save? In legal language, the word except is used as save. So except as otherwise provided from section 54 to 54 GB be chargeable under the head capital gain, and income shall be deemed to be of the year in which transfer takes place. So let me just write it down over here, friends, before we start analyzing this. My request to you all is, you can copy this down along with me as part of your notes. So this provision says the profits and gains arising from transfer of a capital asset shall, save as or except as provided in sections 54 to 54 GB be chargeable under the head capital gain and be deemed as income of the year in which transfer took place. Let's analyze this, friends. When we are analyzing this, we have to understand first and foremost that there are three important elements in this definition or three important phrases in this definition. First and foremost, that there needs to be a transfer. If there is no transfer, then no income arises. For example, if you are holding a capital asset, there is an appreciation in the value of asset. You may recognize that appreciation in your books of accounts through revaluation. Even then, as far as IT Act is concerned, there is no taxable event. Only when a transfer takes place, I will say a taxable event has taken place. Without there being a transfer, there cannot be a taxable event. So in a subsequent video, we have analyzed the definition of transfer, which is one of the most important elements. So that is defined in section 2 clause 47. But that transfer should be of what? That transfer should be of a capital asset. So tomorrow if what I'm selling is my goods or my stock in trade, then capital gain does not arise. Because in such case, as commonsensically you may have understood, business income arises. So please note, friends, any transfer does not result in capital gain. That transfer has to be of a capital asset. If it is not a capital asset, then there is no question of any taxable event under this head. So my next lecture, in fact, is going to be towards the definition of the term capital asset. The term capital asset is defined in section 2 clause 14. Also please note, friends, that when such transfer takes place, the government says that we do not care when you are realizing the proceeds. The taxability will arise in the year when the transfer has taken place. What has taken place? The transfer has taken place. So let me give you an example. Let's say I transfer my house to you. House is a capital asset for me. I have transferred it to you. You have to pay me 1 crore rupees. You tell me that, sir, I will pay this to you in the next year. I say, fair enough. I know you very well. So you can pay it to me next year. Government says that is irrelevant for us. If transfer has taken place today, the taxable event has arisen today. You may realize the sale proceed in a future year. You may have realized the sale proceed in advance. Many a times it happens. When you are selling a house, you may take a deposit or a token. That is irrelevant for the government. What is relevant is that when the transfer has taken place. But also please note, friends, that there are 4 exceptional situations when the capital gain is not taxable in the year of transfer. In another video ahead, I have addressed those exceptional situations when the taxability arises not in the year of transfer but in some other year. Those provisions are section 45 subsection 1a, 45 subsection 2, 45 subsection 5 and 45 subsection 5a. In another video, those are dealt with in depth. Suffice to note right now that as a general rule, as a practical test to see whether income is taxable under capital gain, I have to test three factors which are given in the charging section. The first one is there has to be a transfer. The second one is that transfer should be of a capital asset. And third is when these two factors are satisfied, then the event of taxation takes place in the year of transfer. If either of these factors are not satisfied, then in that case there cannot be any taxability. But in order to escape, in order to reduce, in order to avoid the tax liability, you may do a tax planning. In your intermediate, you have learned these sections 54 to 54 GB. Of course, in final CA, we are going to learn it in much depth. But the point is that in case you say transfer a house and you purchase another house, then you get a deduction under section 54. Like that, there are several deductions given from section 54 to 54 GB. That's the reason why the charging section recognizes that whenever there is a transfer, whenever that transfer is of a capital asset, you will have taxability unless, except the situation is covered under section 54 to 54 GB. I hope, friends, these three elements of the charging section are clear to you all. In my next video, we are going to learn regarding the concept of capital asset, which is the first important limb of my charging section. Thank you.